Hopefully everyone can see that.
Yes, we can see and hear you very well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for having me today. I'm starting off by explaining the broad patterns in fertility in the UK and unpacking some of the averages to help provide a more nuanced picture of fertility change. I'll also show some very brief results of one of our research projects examining young people's fertility intentions and how that relates to economic insecurity. So usually reports of fertility show the period fertility rate, which is a measure that captures a snapshot of fertility in one given year. However, childbearing happens over a lifetime, not just in one year. And if there are big social changes that affect large groups of people, then period total fertility rate can have shocks in any given year and can show some volatility. So here's an example of the total fertility rate from 1940 to the present. And you can see there are big changes during World War II, over here. And then again, during a period of significant change in family planning policy. And then in 2020, during COVID, fertility declined, but then in the year after, it kind of like upticked again with a little bit of a rebound. So that's an example of a year specific shock that something happened in one year, but in the next year, things were kind of just compensated for in the following year. So it was kind of a washout at the end of the day. But on the other hand, cohort fertility rate is the actual number of children women born in a certain year have had. So it describes something like the average number of children women born in 1960 would have had over their entire lifespan. So it's a lot more precise because it actually demonstrates what a real cohort of people experience and accounts for everything that happens in a lifetime, not just what happened in 2020, for example. But it's not usually used as a fertility measure when the media and in a lot of research capacities when fertility is talked about, because you can't calculate it until you have the full data of a whole birth cohort's reproductive lifespan, which means you have to wait a long time before the measure is ready. And then by the time it's ready, the chances are the media and cultural narratives no longer care about this specific group of people. They care about what young people like 25-year-olds and 30-year-olds are doing now, not what 50-year-old people have already done. So, for example, right now, the latest cohort that we have complete full data on are the 1978 birth cohort. But the cultural narrative when we talk about fertility decline, well, we're not talking about 50-year-olds. We're talking about Gen Z and millennials. So cohort fertility, this orange line here, compared to total fertility rate, which is this blue line, you can see it's a lot less volatile than total fertility. The orange line shows the cohort fertility rate ranging from the 1945 birth cohort, so those are women who are 80 years old today, up to the 1978 birth cohort, women who are 47 years old today. And the blue line shows the total fertility rate, that number that people usually talk about when they talk about fertility change and fertility decline. And that blue line is the years 1990 to 2023. So in 1990, for example, the oldest year that we have available for total fertility rate, the 1945 cohort would have been the cohort who had just finished childbearing. So, for example, in 1990, the TFR was around 1.8, but the cohort fertility rate was 2.2. And today, the total fertility rate is 1.4, but the cohort fertility rate is 1.9. So you can see not only is there a gap between cohort fertility rate and total fertility rate, but cohort fertility rate tends to be less volatile than total fertility rate. So then another thing to consider is the actual number of people or the actual number of children that people have, because we all know that nobody has 0.4 children. So this graph shows the family size distribution by birth cohort of women in England and Wales. And we can see that, so across the bottom is the number of children a woman would have, and the y-axis shows the percentage of women. So we can see that even though cohort fertility has declined, the vast majority of women still have two children. So the two-child norm in the UK is still really strong. And there are some changes in the percentage of people who have no children, but that hasn't been like skyrocketing like we would maybe be led to believe given, what the narrative kind of says in the media. There's some changes in the percentage of people who don't have any children, but that's been a decrease over time, not really a clear increase. So it's most likely that fertility decline that we've seen recently is because now people have fewer big families, like 3 or more children. And then finally, we know that people are waiting longer to start their families. So this shows the share of the 1945 cohort. So remember, women who are 80 years old today. The share of the 1945 cohort who had had at least one child by age 30 compared to the 1993 cohort, which is the youngest people we currently have data on. So 82% of the 1945 cohort had had children by age 30, compared to 43% of the current youngest cohort today, the 1993 cohort. So that's a really substantial social change that ultimately affects the year-on-year total fertility rate. So postponement of fertility can get recuperated if people might wait longer to start a family, but then still manage to squeeze in the 2 children that they want to have in their mid to late 30s or their 40s. But if a large portion of the population does this, then this effect will cause the yearly period total fertility rate to decline, which might be why we're seeing current declines in the total fertility rate. So period total fertility rate could underestimate fertility if everybody is suddenly postponing childbearing. Okay, so now having said all that, our research, having said all of, or talked about what has happened, our research focuses on fertility intentions, which is helpful to consider because it reflects what might happen in the future. So it could be that the consistent fertility decline in total fertility rate that we've seen is because of postponement of fertility to later and later ages, or it could be that young people are just not interested in having children. So what this figure shows here is the childbearing intentions of men and women who do not have children. So using one of our data sets, the Generations and Gender Survey, we looked at people who don't have children and what they said about their fertility intentions. And if we look just at the 18 to 29-year-olds here on the left, we can see that, sure, most people say they will definitely or probably have children or plan to have children, but almost half of them say that they're unsure or unlikely, so definitely, probably not. And this is really high compared to surveys of 18 to 29-year-olds from previous years. So while most people say, yeah, I think I plan to have children, there's quite a substantial minority of young people who don't have children and say that they're not sure or that they won't. So then we looked at the background characteristics that could be associated with the plans to have children and found that people with higher household incomes were more likely to say they plan to have children. So if you follow the black line, those are the people who said definitely or probably yes, plan to have children. You can see that there's a positive relationship between household income and that likelihood of having a positive fertility intention. So the black line shows the relationship between household income and the likelihood of saying, yes, I intend to have children. The higher the income, the higher the probability of a positive intention. And this calculation that we made accounts for things like age, sex, partnership, education, all the things that are normally already traditionally associated with fertility intentions. Once all of that is accounted for, we still see this relationship. Another measure of economic security is optimism about the future. So this was another question in the Generations and Gender Survey that we used. And in the next few years, so the question was, in the next few years, how do you expect your financial situation to be? And here on the left-hand side, in this category here, the people who said they expected their future financial situation to be better or much better were much more likely to have a higher positive fertility intention. So those who expect an improved financial future also have a higher likelihood of a positive fertility intention. So just to sum up, we really have seen a dramatic, although we don't have data on young people yet, or what their story will be, because their stories are still unfolding. So while we don't have the data to conclusively say what levels of childlessness will be among Gen Z and younger millennials, there is a dramatic increase in the reported plan to remain childless. So what does this mean? Is this reflecting social change? Like maybe it's just socially acceptable to say you don't want children. In older surveys, we're reflecting maybe reporting bias. Maybe that increase in reported intention to remain childlessness is about acceptability. Or is this that younger people are now just less interested in having children? Or is it a short-term decision rather than a lifetime decision? The question that our survey asked is, do you ever intend, not just in the next like 3 years? But even so, maybe people still think in the short term and not in the long term. And then if these intentions actually bear out and predict actual behavior, then what we've seen in postponement might not be just postponement, but it could be a rejection of childbearing or an opting out of parenthood. And we might see future further declines in the total fertility rate in the UK. So while we can't say yet that there is, dramatic increases in people not having children at all, like the data cannot say that. The data cannot show that yet because it's not available yet. We are seeing increases in intentions to remain childless, which is a new thing. So it's also important that uncertainty, there's quite a few people who say they're not sure, both the 18 to 29-year-old group and the 30 to 44-year-old group that I didn't really touch on, but I showed in the graph. So it's also important to remember that even among older age groups, intentions could change over a lifetime. They're not fixed. So that's, for policymakers, it's really important. It shows that there are potential levers and that, the winds may change. And one great thing about setting the intentions of young people is that perhaps there are circumstances that might change to help people start families if that's what they actually want. Okay, I hope I've kept to my time, but thank you everyone for your attention, and I'll hand the floor back.
Thank you, Bernice, for this very, very nice presentation. It was very important for our conversation today as you set up the scene for us. What's the situation in the UK? What are the trends? And now we are moving to Professor Jani Erola, who is Professor of Sociology at the University of Turku and the principal investigator of the Mapineq project that unite us today here at this meeting. And Jani is going to present the results of it's not about fertility, the survey, not at all. But it has very interesting elements that he's going to share with us to construct this idea of what makes places attractive for people and how, at what extent they can help people to realize their intentions, whatever they are. So, Jani, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Daniel. And I will share as well. Hopefully you can see. Yeah. Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon to everybody, or it's afternoon at least here in Finland. Yes, indeed, I will talk a bit about the conjoint study that we did, but maybe I also say something about the fertility as well. The kind of putting my two cents in the soup in this the whole thing as well. But I figured out that we need a good title, and this is it. When national policies are not enough, should we go local? And I will say something about what we have done previously on the family policies and reflecting that in regard to what we have now there. Some of our very recent or new results really from the Mapineq conjoint study. Few words about the project in general. First, for you, if you want to check out what else we have done during the project. So this is one of the Horizon Europe projects between 8 European organizations. It started in 2022, and it will run until 25. I'm coordinating it here from Turku, Finland. I'm the professor of sociology, but also running the Invest Research Flagship Center, where we are studying all kinds of stuff related to children, young people, and families. The project have multiple collaborators. We have University of Groningen, UNED Madrid, VZB Berlin, Stockholm University, Tallinn University, Population Europe, and also Oxford University, who was initially supposed to be a funded partner that then became an unfunded partner, unfortunately, during the negotiation stage between the European Union. But anyway, the project is funded by European Union, so let's see how it goes. Okay, some of the motivations that we have for the project is that indeed, like this fertility as such, as well as a question on the family formation in general, all kinds of social inequalities, whether they are related to education, family life, and the different stages of the working careers are actually quite a bit interlinked. So when you are changing one, you are probably changing something on the other things as well. And not only that, that they only also depend on the kind of national institutional settings, but also on the local conditions. And quite often, the most of the research previously has considered either the kind of a micro family level of processes or the institutional settings, and much less the regional variation. And this is what we wanted to concentrate on this project as well. And one of the key challenges here is that even if there is a kind of let's say that we have a policy that intends to increase the chances of family formation and lower barriers to that, it is not obvious and always certain that those effects also at the local level are similar one. They actually can have sometimes entirely opposite effects, and our aim is to kind of consider how much that actually on the large scale matters. And of course, that is partially a data question as well. When you want to disentangle this national and local level effects, you have quite a bit of data methodological requirements. Because there you will have multiple forms and factors of inequalities that are correlated and should be actually considered at the same time when you are doing this statistical analysis on these things. So we have three research questions. How do local and national opportunity structures enhance, suppress, or mediate different kind of inequalities? How do changes and spillovers across the life domains and over the life course contribute to these inequalities? And how inequalities are influenced by policies and social shocks. And here we are mostly concentrating on the policy side of these questions. So indeed, the project is almost done. We have a bit more than half, well, actually exactly half a year to go. And we already have quite a few results on these topics. What was already kind of what we did not expect actually was that still, even despite of the looking at the very detailed level at the local level, some of the things that we are considering, it seems to be that the differences between the European societies in education, family formation, and career development are actually greater than in most areas of life than the differences within countries or internally within countries. However, kind of what seems to be not obvious in an obvious relationship to the first main finding, is that actually, if we want to have effective policies in the future, that will still require better consideration of these regional differences. So part of the not having this much of a part of the things that we should consider is that there are anyway this what you could consider as the marginal distribution differences that vary locally, and when you want to design proper policies, you have to take these local conditions and local population structure as well into account to be most effective, or as effective as you can be. So then to the actual topic of this workshop. So we're creating conditions for starting and sustaining family life. And I guess our interest here is kind of a chart what you already saw in Bernice's presentation. So there are across the countries there are shared demographic concerns, and I guess the biggest one is the related kind of a thing that is related to various other demographic trends. But basically, there are concerns about the dropping fertility rates across the countries. And independent how you see that seems to be happening and has been happening at this about 10 years now in quite a few societies, and they seem to be going to the same direction, all of them. This has been a big discussion in Finland, but also in other Nordic countries as well. And it seems to be that indeed the UK is now somehow maybe following up, and the Germany as well. So and in general, European Union is it's about the same as well as the OECD countries in a broader sense. And this is happening at the same time that we also have some evidence that there are growing inequalities within these societies. Because of the demographic behavior as well. It seems to be that the younger, well-educated population is moving to extendingly to the big cities from the smaller places. And because there is a huge educational gender gradient in education, and that the women are especially more and better educated, it is usually the women who are especially most likely to move from the local smaller cities to the bigger ones to kind of pursue their own career and life in general. And this in general is of course then linked already what we as well saw, the postponed family formation, that is probably one of the big factors. So clearly it seems to be that the decision to form families is considered is left later on during the life course, and that is having then the kind of consequences for the fertility. The traditional go-to solution, of course, for this has been that that we have provide stronger family policies, better support for families, and so forth. And this was for a long time. This was a kind of the go-to solution in a sense that especially the Nordic examples were considered because in these countries the fertility rate was for a long time at a high level, and it was assumed that this was because there were lots of policies that were targeted to supporting families and also especially combining careers and family formation together. But more recently, I think the research has been kind of become much more doubting about this, because it seems to be that definitely, even if these policies matter, they do not seem to be enough to reverse this trend where we would want to do that. So I have an example here from a recent paper from last year, where we actually compared the family policies and how they are associated with the second and first birth in Finland, UK, and Germany. And I guess I'm highlighting here the first thing. So what we are looking at where we're looking at the policy changes during the 20 years basically in each of these countries. And there were actually, in all of them, they have changes in the family leave lengths, also the amount of leave pay, child allowances, and family tax breaks as well. More or less in the same direction, although in the German case, actually, they had an example where they actually shortened some of these family leaves, which was something that people wouldn't actually expect to see, but that definitely happened there. And as a total, we have this family package here with basically saying that if we took all these policy changes together, how they would be influencing what kind of association they would be having to the first and second births. And what you can see from the UK results here is basically that it was the only single thing that seems to have at least a small association with the first births, which was the family leave weeks, and that was associated especially with mothers' family leaves, and that was more or less the only one. You can also see that the effect size is super small, so it actually doesn't do much. We had the similar direction effect in the Finnish case, but in that case, with actually extension of the father's family leave rather than mothers. So, but in the German case, nothing. What you can also see here is, what you can see here is that there are super massively inconsistent findings across the countries. So, for instance, if you look at the tax break, family tax break part, where actually all of these countries have had a bit of a variation over time in these tax breaks, they are very different. So you can see that in the Finnish case, you have actually tax breaks having positive effects on the first birth, that actually equally big negative effects on the second one. And then you look at the German, there's actually entirely opposite, which kind of, we do not want to say that the policies do not matter, but it's very hard to anticipate how they actually matter for fertility. And from the policymaker point of view, it definitely kind of makes it almost impossible to draw conclusions on what kind of a policy is, especially at the national level, we should have in order to draw conclusions. So, okay, then the question is what to next? I mean, we want to change these things, probably. I mean, of course, one option is just to adapt to these trends, but of course, I think societies want to at least try something. And the question is then what to do next. What more should we do then? And maybe then the question is whether we could actually do something more on the local level. And the reason for this is that actually in quite a few societies, almost all of them, many of the key services that actually are provided for the families and those who are considering forming them, they actually are provided at the local level. So maybe it could be that if we want to change this or the people's perceptions of what kind of support they will have if they decide to have families, maybe that those things should be especially visible at the local regional level rather than just to say that okay, we have the national policy for this. So if the policies can do something, maybe more could be done locally. But then the question is that if that is the case, what kind of services or what kind of things that these local communities should be concentrated on in order to make a difference. And this is a bit of a more puzzle, and then there's actually very little research previously on that, but we kind of wanted to say something that maybe we can see some sort of evidence on the direction where we should head at if this would be the direction based on our recent conjoint study. So the conjoint study is basically a survey experiment that we run in 4 countries, in Finland, Germany, Spain, and UK. Approximately 2,000 respondents in all of these countries. What you do is that each of the respondents basically rates. They are shown 2 different cities, imaginary cities basically, or hypothetical city pairs, which have different characteristics. And then the respondent is asked to rate which one of them they actually prefer and which one they would be living in, preferably if they would be moving somewhere. And you can see on the right side how what kind of characteristics there has been basically, and in the characteristics were basically changing randomly in each case basically. And we had 12 characteristics indeed, and based on the responses, then we can assess what kind of cities different kinds of people prefer to. So what I'm now showing you first is just the overall UK results for the all respondents. And actually there are quite a few. I'm not showing you the results from the other countries, but they are actually quite substantial differences. So clearly the most important thing in the UK context was that there should be a short waiting time for healthcare. And that make a lot of difference to how much people prefer to specific type of a city. There were issues of trust that was also shown elsewhere. There's lots of kind of reclutants of having migrants, and this is actually across the countries. This is not specifically UK characteristic, but actually applies to all of these countries. However, in the UK case, it was interestingly combined with the openness, the preference of having openness towards minorities at the same time, which kind of can seem a bit of a confusing. In the UK case, there was surprisingly lots of appreciation for having parks and green spaces, and this is something that, for instance, in Finland, people don't care that much because everybody has the access to the forest, and so that is something. And also the extensive public transports and parking infrastructure was considered important. What was surprisingly little thought was that actually the crime rate, of course, in the UK and actually all of these countries, the crime rates are not massive, so they probably shouldn't matter that much. Surprisingly, unemployment or the employment opportunities do not seem to be massively big thing. Neither how good air quality or pollution situation is. Maybe there's not that much pollution in general in these countries. Low housing cost was definitely something that UK was in contrast to the other countries. I think all 3 countries, the housing cost question was on the top of the list, and for whatever reason, in the UK case, it didn't seem to do much of a difference. Active culture and nightlife, I think it was kind of already in all the countries. This was actually something that the final one, the relevancy of having higher education institutes. So we definitely beforehand thought that this should matter, what kind of educational opportunities city would have. Also assuming that it actually provides local economy, something that should matter. But no, it was in all countries that had actually a relatively low importance. And in the UK case, it doesn't seem to be mattering at all. So it doesn't really explain whether your city has a university or not doesn't seem to be making much of a difference in the UK case. Now, however, the question is then, of course, what does it mean in terms of those who are actually considering of forming family, or they already have family or want to stay in the area or want to maybe move away? What kind of things were mattering? So we didn't have direct question about that, but we can say something about it if we are looking at the specific age groups and looking at men and women separately. And in particular, men and women at different age groups, they differ according to their preferences in some of these items. And in the UK case, and there were three things that I kind of pinpoint as an areas where the policies actually can make a difference. One is the healthcare availability, second is the housing cost, and the third is the green spaces. So here I have I had also the older groups as well there, but just concentrate of the final results for the age groups of age 30 or below, or age 30 to 31 to 50. So the assumption that those who are under 30 are still considering forming a family, whereas those who are 30 to 50, in most cases they already have family or have just passed that idea already entirely. So what is surprising that if you think about what actually matters is that even if the housing prices didn't matter that much, but for young people that really does. It's a clear an area where when you are 30 or below, that is an issue that make things or place more attractive. But when you are over 30, it doesn't really matter anymore. So you have made your choices of where you are going to live, and that doesn't really change much. However, then we have differences in terms of the healthcare again. I mean, it's clearly important issues for all of these groups, but especially women in the age of 31 to 50, presumably because they already have, quite a few of them already have families. So the question is how much their family actually have an access to the healthcare. And whereas in the parks, I think it's generally what you can see that for young guys, it really doesn't matter, but everybody else considered as an interesting thing. So what to conclude from this then? It seems to be hinting that okay, local policies can make a difference to how this family formation decisions are done and where people want to start their families. So in general, especially knowing that okay, the family policies can be helpful, but they can only do so much. So maybe we should consider what we can do at the local level, both to support the families or when you already have the family to maintain and maybe have the further children if you want to, and also to making sure that the local environment is such that it can make it kind of a viable solution, viable option for young people to have and start a family in their local environment if they are willing to do so. And all of this, of course, guys, kind of underlining as well what we know about that the life cost change matters. So there's probably no single solution for what is needed in order to support the families and family formation, and that depends on the family stage, life course stage. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you very much. So happy to.
Thank you so much, Jani. It was very informative. Thank you so much. We'll move now to the third speaker we have here with us today. And it's my pleasure, great honor to introduce you to Raj Patel. He's the Associate Director of Policy at Understanding Society, a very important panel study in the UK, and is part of the Institute of Social and Economic Research at the University of Essex. Raj, the floor is yours.
Brilliant. Thank you, Daniela. Let me begin by sharing my screen. Okay, I hope people can see that. I thought, in terms of contributing to this discussion, um, I had to think about, well, what might be useful. And certainly, I think both Bernice and Yanni talked about family formation. So I've added some more findings that could be useful in terms of issues such as parenting and housing, which I suspect are all equally relevant. So I'm looking at both, not only family formation, but actually what might be important in terms of sustaining uh, children's life as well. So these are kind of a range of findings I'll cover. A brief quick note about understanding society if people are not familiar with it. It's a panel study, as Daniela mentioned, that enables research on the whole household and relationships within it. It's a multi-topic study, which means we can look at issues such as social factors, economic factors, relational factors, housing, health, and other dimensions of life. All the adults are interviewed who are on the panel once a year, and children who are aged 10 to 15 complete a separate youth questionnaire. And then we collect data from parents, or it could be carers, on issues such as pregnancies, births, and how children are doing at the ages of 1, 3, 5, and 8. And we follow the individuals and households over time, so one can look at circumstances or situations pre and post key family changes, including new household members joining, and therefore the study can be very useful in looking at factors. Studies things such as pregnancy, family formation, separation, young adults living home, and indeed returning later on, as well as residential moves. There's a couple of special data sets we've created, which hopefully will help research in this space. So one of them is a pregnancy and early childhood data set, where we've identified anyone who reports a pregnancy and brought that kind of data together in a much more accessible format. And then we have a separate file on family matrices, which connects families across households and across time. And so there may be factors such as, for instance, does it help if you have grandparents living with you in terms of managing children, for instance? Um, Clearly, just a bit of a descriptive set of information which people who maybe aren't familiar with the UK might be interested in. There's certainly been a growth in non-traditional family forms in the UK in terms of lone parents, stepfathers, and blended families, for instance. Family structures are becoming more diverse by education levels. We're seeing a trend towards cohabitation, and that's kind of doubled between 1991 and 2015, according to the data that we've collected. And we're also seeing, obviously, some changes around attitudes to families and how different they might be by ethnicity, particularly, I guess, given the wave of migration over the last 20 years or so. The greatest differences tend to be in cohabitation. For instance, some ethnic groups are more likely to veer towards marriage and less likely to support the idea of cohabitation, but smallest amongst parenthood, which is the intention to have children. It's also worth saying that there are specific UK factors which might be important to think about, such as the fact that 31% of all children in the UK are living in relative poverty. And we know that both poverty and parenting matters for how children are doing. So I thought, really, in terms of the research findings, I've picked 3 studies which are interesting and look at not only issues about formation, but also look at issues about children and children's experiences and the nature of parenting. And so I'll briefly give you a quick insight into the findings, headline findings from those 3 studies, and I've included references and sources. So if anyone's interested, then certainly, by all means, have a look at those. One of the first studies was looking at economic conditions and whether that has an impact on fertility rates. And so this piece basically looked at both men and women and the income levels in relation to first birth. And where you can see that, again, I think this kind of reflects a bit of what Bernice was saying. People who have twice the median income show strong associations with the first birth, and that's true for both women and men. And where the median income is half of the national level, then you can see that the first birth rates have been declining since 2001 to 2016 in the data. Interestingly, the patterns seem to be more consistent for women, but also similar results have been found where data has been compared in Australia, Germany, and of course, the UK as well. The overall conclusion of the study was that, interestingly, economic uncertainty didn't show much of an effect. Clearly, we are living through current uncertain economic times, but that doesn't seem to be able to explain the differences. More important seems to be income prerequisites of parenthood, which have increased over the past decades. And there could be a number of explanations. We're not entirely always clear why that might be, but it might be that people perceive that the shift towards intensive parenting or parenting norms, or people might be much more aware of the need for careful planning across the life course, and therefore much more mindful of the level of income needed to bring up children. There might be issues about rising costs of childbearing, and certainly the author who did this research also found that in Netherlands, fertility declined more in regions where house prices increased. So there may be aspects of that in people's minds, possibly. And in order to, I guess, look at fertility, we probably need to drill it much more into the inequalities between and within generations to try and understand the factors that may be at play here. The second study was looking at parenting gaps and parenting and the nature of parenting and how that's been changing. And so this particular author, Matthias Dobke, who's written a book as well, and I've referenced that, who spoke at our family policy conference, looked at the trends over time between mothers and fathers. And as I mentioned earlier, this shows that certainly parents are spending a lot more time in bringing up their children. That's true for both mothers and fathers, but in fact, there's a significant gap between the amount of time per week that more educated parents spend compared to less educated parents. And similarly, when the money spent on children is examined, again, there is a significant gap that's showing between parents who are in the kind of top decile of income compared to parents who are in the bottom quintile or quartile, rather. And you can see that gap has been growing since the 1980s, showing a much wider gap in the amount of money being spent on children between different types of families. The third study was looking at housing and wealth dimensions. And this was by David Sturrock from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. And here he was looking at the age of 30 and comparing the difference between wealth and parenthood. And what this study showed was that those with parents in the wealthiest fifth are 6 times more likely to be wealthier than parents in the poorest fifth. And as you can see, that kind of wealth gap might be more critical in some respects in understanding some aspects than necessarily income, because wealth inequality has been growing faster than income inequality. We don't fully understand, obviously, at this stage, how this might be playing into issues about family formation, but certainly the trend in wealth inequalities is particularly prominent, at least in the UK, and may be the case in some of the other countries as well, possibly. And then when you look at how young people get onto the housing ladder, what that shows is again very much that those with wealthier parents tend to get onto the housing ladder much earlier. That might shape their family formation patterns, possibly. And as those who delay buying a house, for instance, might decide to have children later or postpone that. But that gap certainly is growing between the bottom and the top across time. The last bit of study looked at overcrowding, and it was more generally trying to understand who was at risk of overcrowding and what was the effect on children more generally. And again, very much what you can see from this study was that the risk of overcrowding, at least in the UK, is much more prevalent amongst people who live in social housing than those in private rented accommodation or in home ownership, and indeed much more prominent among certain ethnic groups than others. However, when you look at the composition of families, then it's children children in white families are most likely to be living in overcrowded simply because of the numbers and greater share in the population. And overcrowding is more common for children aged 5 to 9. Overall, the key headline findings were that there are higher risks of physical health problems, social, emotional behavior problems amongst children in overcrowded housing. But when you then control for covariates, which include things like income, tenure, household size, etc., those relationships largely disappear. So we don't think overcrowding is necessarily a key factor in children's development, except in relation to probably peer relationships, which might be explained by the fact that you're having to share bedrooms, for instance, or there might be children who have to live in close proximity and share a lot of other things, including people with special education needs and disabilities. So that's just a quick headline amongst 3 studies. There's a whole bunch of other presentations that are available, which are looking at family formation and children's development. And so I've provided a link there where you can look at those at your leisure. And we've also written a blog on that, which might be of interest to people. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Or perhaps you can share the link to the blog on the event, and then so our participants can check, because it's really interesting what you have done. Thank you so much for your presentation. Now we'll give the floor to our final speaker, which is James-Stuart Duffin. He's Chief Executive Officer at Relationships Glasgow, Convener on the Charity Law at the Law Society of Scotland, and advisor at the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow. Very interesting affiliations, but Stuart is a fantastic colleague. We have been working together for more than a decade already. When we started collaborating at the project Families and Societies, was led by Professor Jani Erola, who is with us today here, but will have to leave very soon, unfortunately. But there was when we got to know each other, and Stuart was part of this project as a stakeholder advisor. And he has been working in very different organizations in Europe, and was part of different European networks on working on family issues. So that's why he has a very interesting perspective, and we're very, very honored to have you here with us today, Stuart. Thank you.
Yeah, wow. What an introduction, and thank you, Daniela. Yeah, just a bit of background. I am Chief Executive of Relationships Glasgow, which is a relationship counselling charity. We operate in the Greater Glasgow region, which actually covers about 70% of the population of Scotland. Just a couple of facts in relation to the presentations that have been done so far. Many researchers forget that the United Kingdom is 4 jurisdictions, and therefore, within those 4 jurisdictions, they have different perspectives and different approaches and different institutions. For instance, Scotland, the NHS is totally different from the England and Wales NHS. Our education system is different, our legal system is different, and even our language is different. Our language was suppressed by the 1947 Education Act. So, there are issues there that when many researchers talk about the UK, they're really referring to England and Wales and not the 4 jurisdictions that are in that. So that's just something I wanted to comment on. Anyway, families, I'm hesitant to say this in a room full of demographers, but families are becoming smaller, older, and more diverse, with technology bridging the gaps. But persistent inequalities are there, requiring urgent policy dimensions. And I was really pleased to see in Jani's presentation the emphasis on local. I've been talking for many years that we should be looking at a practice to policy agenda rather than a policy to practice agenda. So it's about a bottom-up approach to policy rather than a top-down. So we're seeing all of this happen, and this is having sort of an impact not only on families, but individuals, people, and communities. So, in general terms, what we need to look at in going forward is targeted support. We need to look at intergenerational equity. And we need to look at data-driven reforms in terms of the policy agenda. I want to sort of give a little bit of background and sort of do a little bit of case study in terms of Scotland. As everybody knows, Scotland has many attractive features. It has, for families, it has good schools, it has safe, supportive communities, it has green spaces and outdoor activities, and housing quality and affordability is good compared with the rest of the UK, except if you live in Edinburgh. That is. So, there are issues that are really important in terms of looking at family formation. Access to services is really important. NHS in Scotland and access to healthcare is far, and I make no qualms about saying this, is far superior to access to healthcare in England and Wales. Care of the elderly is free in Scotland. All prescriptions are free in Scotland. Higher education is free in Scotland to Scottish residents. So, this creates a whole different dimension in the creation of families, community, well-being, and etc. Local economies are quite vibrant. Although there are challenges out there, there are local economies whereby they're looking at local services, local food production, local a whole range of issues that actually create this whole agenda around making it good. Transport systems are good in Scotland in the majority of areas. Rail transport is actually a public service. So it is really supported in terms of getting people to work. One of the key things as well, as a person over 60 now, I have a free bus pass. So I can travel anywhere in Scotland free, which is, is good for well-being, good for emotional support. Young people under the age of 26 also get a free bus pass. So they have access, and that really helps them in terms of finding jobs away from their local community. So that gives a challenge, and it gives support for looking at sustaining families, but also looking at creating families. Challenges Families still have challenges in Scotland. Poverty and financial insecurity is a major issue. The UK government put in place child benefit legislation whereby it was only 2 children could get child support. Scottish government have actually taken a step, and they give £27.93, I think it is, per week per child for every family to help support children get out of poverty. We're seeing cost of living increases in Scotland, particularly in energy. Scotland is the major producer of wind energy in the UK, yet energy costs in Scotland are double that of what they are in England and Wales. So there's a challenge there in terms of going forward in that. What we're seeing in our service, particularly around families and individuals, about both family formation and with current family structures, is mental health strain. Relationships are breaking down because of debt. Relationships are breaking down because of the strains in terms of employment. Pre-COVID, people were okay about taking time off work when they needed rest days for well-being. Today, they're not. So they're being much more stressed. Family formation is now really dependent on 2-income families. Childcare costs are increasing, and that is an additional pressure. People are locked into jobs that they may not like because they need the economic stability of that job. Housing instability is a particular issue, particularly in rural areas, whereby accessing public rented and public funded housing is limited. We're also seeing that young people inability to get on the housing ladder, particularly in the central region of Scotland, where housing costs are expensive. And we're seeing private sector rents after the COVID period, which under COVID were regulated, are now being deregulated. So costs are going up again. Childcare is an employment barrier. I've always muted that childcare is an economic development issue. And I think that is something that we really need to see going forward. And employers have a responsibility to provide childcare, as well as public services and private services, because without childcare, families cannot go to work, or there is an opportunity cost that's there. So all of these things create challenges for sustaining a family. What we've seen, particularly in Scotland as well, is that given the reduction in public sector funding, we've seen the role of the third sector take an added role in the delivery of holistic family support services, supporting families when things go wrong. The third sector, charities, voluntary organisations and community groups taking a really active role in supporting people. They're also taking an active role in terms of advocating for policy change. This week, I'm giving evidence to the Scottish Parliament on Thursday on economic abuse and the financial costs of actually coming out of a relationship. So there are issues there that we're really looking at. Third sector, with limited resources, are bridging the gaps in services. We're and amplifying those voices. Sorry, my phone's ringing there, so I just had to put it on silent. And it put me off my stride there. So what I now want to bring into this is that many services and many support for sustaining families is based on a crisis. When something happens, there's always services to come in there to support, whether that is through, whether that's addiction, whether it's alcohol, whether it's family breakdown. My service and what we're trying to deliver is relationship counselling and family support before things go wrong. So it's the importance of early intervention. its importance of access to building healthy relationship between family members. It's looking at community-based approaches so that we can actually build a practice to policy approach in developing and sustaining family life. One of the key things that came about through influencing the Scottish government was the Scotland's Baby Box programme. There was a call there to begin to look at how a universal benefit in terms of newborns could actually help quality of life of newborns and give every newborn a start in Scotland. So a Baby Box was created, whereby it provided everything that was needed in terms of for that child. It has universal access. Take-up's been about 80%, and it's really given a good young babies a good start in life. The box includes baby clothes, bedding, a bath towel, baby wrap, toys, bibs, thermometer, nursing pads, and more. It contains information and items to encourage positive parenting behaviours and early oral health. These are all issues that actually give good foundations for the future. The box itself is fairly sturdy and can provide a safe space for a young baby to sleep, particularly people that are financially challenged, that the cost of actually having a cot and a pram and everything is fairly good. But it also has symbolic value. The box is intended to make families feel valued and supported by society, with features like a space to write the baby's name and decorative illustrations that other children in the family can use for the box. So it has key issues there. The reception has been a high take-up, it's had positive feedback, and it's had operational success. This is a key way of addressing inequality in the first stage of family formation. It's also beginning that particular issue about parental engagement, parental discussing. When we're parents, we don't all know how to parent. It's a learning process, but there is feeling that we're part of a community. And it's giving community and societal value in terms of that family formation piece. So it's been involved as well in terms of professional training with midwives, social workers, family support workers, and it's had real positive aspect on the quality of life of young children. So, we're seeing these sort of early intervention services in Scotland having quite an impact on family formation and a positive impact on children. Early access is vital. And I've been saying this for a number of years. But also what is vital going forward is attention to adults. For so many of us, the focus is on young people and children, and I make no apologies for saying that. Young people and children have parents and guardians. We need to work with adult services to support adults in terms of that journey and in reducing adverse childhood experiencing, improving parental capacity, and looking at how we can integrate services and give financial and practical aid to parents in terms of that journey of parenting. We've also got to look at the issue of, and it's one of the key things, if you lose a child in terms of its engagement in education, it's very difficult to get that child back. So by involving parents, we can actually work with those transition pieces. And we can stop the escalation of crisis interventions and the costly crisis of interventions. So we need to look at policy and systematic impact that these early interventions can have. I'd also like to say, in ending this, I would like to give a special focus because we've been working with a number of LGBTIQ partners and looking at their interest and counselling them, their interest in terms of parenting. And it's something that we need to look forward in the whole discussion about fertility and family formation is looking at LGBTIQ couples and their role and the services and the institutions that support them going forward to be parents. The legal process and all of these things is uneven across Europe. It's even uneven in Scotland. But the importance of getting it right for the child is vital. Getting it right for the child and getting it right for the parent will actually endorse quality of life of future families. Thank you.